On a warm July evening in 1995, a small California community would be shaken by a crime so disturbing that it would haunt the nation for decades. At the center of this tragedy was Elyse Pahler, a vibrant 15-year-old girl whose life was brutally cut short by 3 classmates, teenagers she knew, trusted, and thought were her friends. What began as teenage rebellion, fascination with heavy metal, and reckless experimentation spiraled into an act of cold-blooded murder that the perpetrators described as a satanic sacrifice. But beneath their dark claims, the true motives were far more sinister, personal, and disturbing. This is the story of Elyse Pahler, her promising young life, the 3 boys who took it from her, the community left in shock, and the legal and cultural aftermath that still echoes today. Elyse Pahler was born on April 24, 1980, in Arroyo Grande, California, a quiet, picturesque town on the Central Coast, known more for its small-town charm than for violent crime. Her family described Elyse as artistic, lively, and imaginative. She loved fashion, often making or altering her own clothing, and had a creative flair that set her apart from her peers. Friends recalled her as someone with a kind heart, a gentle sense of humor, and an adventurous spirit. But like many teenagers, Elyse was navigating the challenges of adolescence. At 15, she was experimenting with new friends, different interests, and finding her place in the world. While her parents were protective, Elyse, like many teenagers, sometimes pushed boundaries. What no one could predict, however, was that her attempts to explore independence would put her in the path of 3 teenage boys whose dark obsessions would end in tragedy. The perpetrators were not strangers. Elyse knew them. They were from her school, hung around her social circles, and projected the image of rebellious teens caught up in heavy music, drugs, and a dangerous fascination with the occult. At 15, Fiorella was the youngest of the 3. He was described as brooding, deeply obsessed with death metal, and more extreme in his dark interest than his peers. Investigators and later testimonies revealed that Fiorella had an obsessive fixation on Elyse. Despite her lack of interest in him, his unhealthy attraction grew into a dangerous obsession. 16 years old at the time, Jacob was often described as a follower. He smoked marijuana, dabbled in drugs, and was deeply influenced by his friends. He participated in the band Hatred, a death metal project the boys started, but had no real direction in life. Later, he would openly admit that Fiorella's obsession with Elyse was the true reason she was targeted. At 17, Royce was the oldest and perhaps the most conflicted of the trio. He came from a religious family and seemed to be drifting between 2 worlds, one of faith and another of rebellion. Ultimately, it was Royce who, months after crime, confessed to a clergyman and led authorities to Elise's body. His conscience, after months of carrying the secret, could not bear the weight of what he had done. Together, the 3 formed a bond through their fascination with death metal, rebellion, and what they perceived as the darker side of life. They created their band, Hatred, a name that would later seem hauntingly prophetic. In the summer of 1995, the boys developed a twisted plan. They claimed they believed that in order to gain better musical abilities and succeed as a band, they needed to perform a satanic ritual. And for that ritual, they needed a sacrifice. Specifically, they sought a virgin blonde with blue eyes, a description that matched Elyse Pahler. Court documents and later confessions revealed that the satanic sacrifice justification was more of a cover for Fiorella's true motive, his obsession with Elyse. Still, the 3 convinced themselves that killing her would serve a purpose, whether supernatural, personal, or both. The boys lured Elyse with a promise many teenagers at the time would have accepted: an invitation to hang out, smoke marijuana, and listen to music in a secluded area. But behind that casual invitation lay a plan to murder her in cold blood. On the night of July 22, 1995, Elyse was invited by the boys to a eucalyptus grove near the Napomo Mesa, a remote area not far from her home. At first, it must have felt like a typical teenage hangout, friends sneaking off to smoke and escape parental oversight. But within moments, it turned into a nightmare. First attack, Jacob Delashmutt slipped a belt around Elise's neck and tried to strangle her. She struggled, fought, and gasped for air. Second attack, Joseph Fiorella pulled out a hunting knife and stabbed Elyse in the neck. Continued violence. As Elyse cried out in pain, Royce Casey and Jacob joined in, stabbing her multiple times in the neck and back. Final moments. Elyse, bleeding heavily, moaned in agony. Royce stomped on her neck to silence her. None of the wounds were immediately fatal, but the combination of blood loss and internal damage caused her slow, excruciating death. The attack was brutal, prolonged, and senseless. For hours afterward, the boys lingered at the scene, leaving her lifeless body in the grove. Later testimony suggested that they had plans of returning to commit necrophilia. Authorities could never fully confirm this due to the decomposition of her remains, but the mere suggestion added another disturbing layer to the crime. Elyse Pahler's bright future ended that night, in a grove where her laughter should have echoed, not her final screams. When Elyse didn't come home, her family was immediately alarmed. This wasn't like her. They contacted police friends, and the community began searching. For weeks, the Pahler family lived in a nightmare of uncertainty. Missing posters went up. Neighbors helped scour fields and roadsides. Yet Elyse had vanished without a trace. The three boys, meanwhile, went about their lives as though nothing had happened. They attended school, practiced with their band, and carried the secret of their crime. But the guilt, especially for Royce Casey, was slowly eating away at them. 8 months later, in March 1996, the truth finally surfaced. 17-year-old Royce Casey broke down. Struggling with his conscience and perhaps fearing damnation, he confessed to a local pastor. The pastor urged him to go to police, and eventually Casey did. In his chilling confession, Casey described a murder in detail, leading investigators to the eucalyptus grove. There, buried in a shallow grave, were the partially mummified remains of Elyse Pahler. The community, which had clung to fading hope that Elyse might still be alive, was devastated by the discovery. With Casey's confession, authorities arrested all three boys. Joseph Fiorella, the youngest but arguably the most dangerous, was portrayed as the ringleader. His obsession with Elyse was the true motive. Jacob Delashmutt admitted to his role, later clarifying that the satanic reasoning was just an excuse, that Fiorella wanted Elyse dead. Royce Casey, who confessed, was seen as remorseful but equally guilty. The trial would expose not only their violent act, but also their fixation on heavy metal music, particularly the band Slayer. Elyse's parents, devastated and searching for answers, filed a civil lawsuit against the band Slayer, arguing that their lyrics had incited the murder. Songs describing death, sacrifice, and satanic imagery, they argued, had influenced the impressionable teens to commit murder. The case gained national attention, but was ultimately dismissed. Courts ruled that artistic expression, even if violent or disturbing, was protected under the First Amendment, and that Slayer could not be held responsible for the boys' actions. The case, however, ignited a broader cultural debate. How much influence does music and media have on troubled teens? In 1997, all three boys pleaded no contest to first-degree murder. Joseph Fiorella received 26 years to life. Jacob Delashmutt received 25 years to life. Royce Casey also received 25 years to life. The sentences reflected the severity of the crime, but also left open the possibility of parole after a minimum of 25 years. For Elyse's family, the sentences brought justice but not closure. They had lost a daughter, and nothing could bring her back. For decades, the three killers sat in prison. Over time, their parole hearings drew community outrage and media coverage. Royce Casey, the confessor, expressed remorse during parole hearings. In 2021, Governor Gavin Newsom denied his release, citing the brutal and sadistic nature of the crime. But in 2025, after nearly 30 years, Casey was finally granted parole. Elyse's father supported the decision, believing Casey had genuinely changed. Jacob Delashmutt was also granted parole in 2025 and released. Joseph Fiorella, still considered the most dangerous, remains incarcerated. His next parole hearing is scheduled for 2026. The releases divided opinion. Some saw rehabilitation, others saw betrayal of justice. The murder of Elyse Pahler left an indelible mark on Arroyo Grande and beyond. Families lost. Her parents and siblings were left to grieve, forced to live with unanswered questions and the pain of knowing Elyse's final moments. Cultural debates. The Slayer lawsuit became a touchstone in discussions about the impact of violent media. Pop culture influence. Elyse's murder partly inspired the 2009 film Jennifer's Body, where a teenage girl is sacrificed by a rock band. True crime coverage. Her story has been revisited in documentaries, podcasts, and true crime series, including Investigation Discovery's A Killer Among Friends. But beyond the headlines, Elyse remains remembered as more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. Her creativity and spirit live on in the memories of those who knew her. The story of Elyse Pahler is one of innocence lost to senseless violence, of teenagers consumed by dark fantasies, and of communities scarred forever. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, the vulnerability of youth, the dangers of obsession, and the thin line between fantasy and reality when it comes to impressionable minds. For Elyse's family, nearly 3 decades have passed since that July night in 1995, yet the memory of their daughter remains as vivid as ever. And for the rest of us, her story is a haunting reminder that evil can lurk where we least expect it, sometimes in the faces of those we think we know.